At 56, Loretta Schenck had spent 30 years learning the weight of other people's bodies in the dark. She was a nurse's aide on the night shift at a county home in southern Indiana. She knew how to turn a sleeping man without waking him. She knew how to settle a frightened woman who no longer remembered her own children. She knew how to fold a blanket up under a chin so the cold could not find a gap. She was good at this. No one ever told her so. So when the lawyer in Jasper read out the will of her mother, Wilma Schenck, Etta did not argue. The house and the savings and the 40 acres along the creek would go to her brother Gary. She had not expected the house. She had not, if she was honest, expected anything. What she had not expected was the attic. The clause was short. To her son, Gary Raymond Schenck, the whole of the property. To her daughter, Loretta Wilma Schenck, the contents of the attic and the right to enter the house to retrieve them for the sum of $10. $10. Her mother had set a price on it. You set a price on a thing at a yard sale so that giving it away does not look like charity. Etta paid the $10 in cash. She counted it out onto the lawyer's desk, a 5 4 1 4 quarters, because that was what she had in her purse that morning. She remembered it was 8:40. The bank across the square had not opened yet, and Gary had checked his phone twice to be sure. But to understand the attic, you have to go back to the morning the call came. And you have to understand one thing first. Etta Schenck had been told in 100 small ways across 40 years that she was the child her mother had not especially wanted to keep. The call came on a Tuesday in late February. It was the kind of day southern Indiana gets in the long tail of winter, when the snow has gone to brown slush and the sky sits low and gray over the bare hardwoods. Etta had worked the night before. She was asleep when the phone rang, and she let it ring. Then she saw it was the home where her mother lived now, and she sat up. Wilma had gone in her sleep, 91 years old. No struggle, the nurse said in the voice nurses use. Etta used that voice herself 4 nights a week. She heard everything underneath it. She drove out to the home and sat with the body a while. Her mother's hands were folded on the sheet. They were a quilter's hands, though Etta did not think of them that way then. The first 2 fingers of the right hand were calloused hard at the tips, the nails worn short and square. There was a faint groove worn into the side of the middle finger, the kind a thimble leaves over many years. Etta had seen those hands her whole life. She had never once been allowed to hold them for long. Her father, Raymond, had died 11 years before. Etta still carried his pocket watch in her coat. It was a cheap thing, a railroad-style watch he'd bought used. It had stopped one afternoon, and she had never reset it. It said 4:10. She wound it every Sunday so it would tick. She just would not move the hands. She could not have told you why. The funeral was small. Gary came down from Indianapolis with his wife and stood at the front in a good coat. He shook the hands of men he did not know. He accepted their sympathy as though the grief belonged mostly to him. Etta stood off to the side near the door, the way she stood. A few of the older women from the church nodded at her. One of them, Vera Holtkamp, took both her hands and held them, and did not say anything at all. After at the reading, Gary had been gracious about the house. He could afford to be. He told Etta she could take whatever she wanted from the attic, no rush. Then he said the thing that stayed with her. "It's just old junk up there, Etta. Mom never threw anything out. You'll be hauling it to the dump for a month." He smiled when he said it, and it was not a cruel smile, which somehow made it worse. "Better you than me, I guess." She nodded. She signed where the lawyer pointed. She paid her $10. That was the whole of it. It had always been Gary. Etta did not think this with bitterness anymore. She had worn the bitterness smooth long ago, the way water wears a stone. Gary was the son, and the first, and the one who left and made something of himself in the city, and a family in that country measured a child by those things. Etta had stayed. She had married a man who drank and then left, taken the night shifts no one wanted, and lived alone in a one-bedroom over the hardware store. She had been at every bedside in that county at 3 in the morning. She had not been at a single one that anybody talked about over Sunday dinner. The ones who stay are the ones the family stops seeing first. That was a thing. Etta knew the way. She knew the weight of a sleeping body. She had stopped expecting it to be otherwise. What Etta could not have known, sitting in that office with her coat still buttoned because the heat had not come up yet, was something her mother had arranged on purpose. Wilma had spent the last decade of her life building toward this exact morning. The $10 was not an insult, it was a key. Wilma had needed her daughter to go up those stairs alone, with no one watching. It was how Wilma herself had gone up every night for 50 years. And what waited at the top of the stairs would take Etta the rest of that spring to understand. It would end with 300 people in a museum in Indianapolis, weeping over the work of a woman none of them had ever met. But that came later. First came the house and the cold and a door at the top of the back stairs that had been painted shut for as long as Etta could remember. She went out to the farm on the first Saturday in March. The thaw had started. The creek along the back 40 ran brown and high. The gravel drive had gone to mud. She left her boots by the kitchen door, out of a habit her mother had drilled into her 60 years gone. The house was cold, and smelled of the cold, and of cedar, and of the particular dust of a place where an old woman has lived alone. Gary had already taken what he wanted from the main floor. The good clock was gone from the mantel. The pale rectangle it left behind was the cleanest spot in the room. Etta did not go up right away. She made coffee in her mother's percolator, since the power was still on. She drank it black with a few grains of salt stirred in, the way Wilma had always taken it. Her mother had said salt cut the bitterness of cheap coffee. They had never once in Etta's childhood bought the good kind. Etta had kept the habit her whole life. People at the home thought it was strange. She had stopped explaining it. The back stairs were narrow and steep, the way they built them in farmhouses of that age. Stairs were a thing you tolerated then, not a thing you admired. At the top was the attic door. Someone long ago had papered over it with the same rose print wallpaper as the hall, and then painted the trim. The door had nearly disappeared into the wall. You would not have known it was there if you did not already know. Etta knew. She had been forbidden that door as a girl. Her mother had told her the floor up there was rotten, that a child could fall through, that it was no place to play. Etta had believed her until she was about 12. Then she had stopped believing her. Then she had simply stopped wondering, the way you stop wondering about a thing you have decided is not for you. The skeleton key hung on a nail behind the kitchen door, where it had hung her whole life. She had walked past it 10,000 times. The lock was stiff. The paper tore along the seam of the door when she pulled, a long, clean strip of roses coming away in her hand. The hinges had been oiled. That was the first thing that did not fit. A door painted shut and papered over for decades should have shrieked. This one swung open quiet and smooth. It was as though someone had been keeping it ready. Cold air came down the stairwell, and with it the smell of cedar, strong and clean, and under it the smell of cotton and old paper and lavender. Etta stood at the bottom of the attic steps. Her father's watch ticked in her coat pocket, saying 4:10. She looked up into the dark, and she felt something she had not felt in a very long time. She felt that she had been expected. She found the light by feel, a pull chain on a bare bulb. The attic ran the length of the house, and it was full. Not full of junk. Etta had cleaned out enough rooms after enough deaths to know junk when she saw it. This was not that. Along the north wall, her father had built a run of cedar-lined shelves, floor to rafter. The joinery was tight and square. The shelves were stacked with quilts, dozens of them. Each one was folded into a sleeve of unbleached muslin and tied with cotton tape. On the outside of each sleeve was a small paper tag in her mother's careful hand. There were cedar chests too, 3 of them, and a steamer trunk with brass corners. A quilting frame leaned broken down against the chimney. A single ladder-back chair was pulled up to a small table under the window, where the light would have been best in the afternoon. On the table sat a kerosene lamp, an oil can, a pincushion shaped like a tomato, and a thimble. Etta picked up the thimble first. She did not know why. It was silver or silver-plated, worn down to brass at the edges. At the crown, where the needle is driven against it 10,000 times a night, the metal had been pressed so thin over so many years that it had nearly worn through. You could hold it to the bulb and see the light come faintly through the dimple. Etta had never once seen her mother sew. Not a button, not a hem. And here was a thimble worn to the edge of a hole. She held it in her palm a long time. Then she put it in her coat pocket next to the watch, and she did not take it out again for the rest of the day. The cold drove her down before dark. But she came back the next Saturday and the one after. Somewhere in there, the going up stopped being a chore and started being the only thing she wanted to do. It was on the 3rd Saturday that she took the first quilt down off the shelf and opened it on the floor. And it was on the 3rd Saturday that Vera Holtkamp knocked on the kitchen door. Etta heard the knock from the attic and went down. Vera stood on the step in a man's barn coat with a foil-covered dish in her hands. She was 84 and stood very straight, the way women of her generation were taught to stand. She looked at Etta a long moment before she spoke. "You look just like her," Vera said. "Around the eyes, she'd hate that I said so." She held out the dish, persimmon pudding. "I made too much. I always make too much." They sat at the kitchen table. Vera had known Wilma 60 years. They had been in the same quilting circle at St. Boniface, back when the parish still ran one. The women had gathered around a frame in the fellowship hall every Tuesday, from after lunch until it got too dark to see the needle. "Your mother stopped coming to the circle in 1974, Vera said. "Just stopped? We figured she'd lost interest." "Some do." She turned her coffee cup in its saucer without drinking. "She never lost interest. I know that now. She just didn't want anybody watching what she was making." "What was she making?" Etta asked. Vera looked at her a while. "I think," she said slowly, "you'd better show me." They went up together, Vera's hand tight on the rail. At the top she stopped and looked at the cedar shelves, the muslin sleeves, the broken-down frame. Her face did something complicated. She put her fingers to her mouth. "Land's sakes," she said softly. "Oh, Wilma." Etta had the first quilt still spread open on the attic floor. Vera knelt beside it slowly, with a wince, and ran her hand flat over the surface without quite touching the stitching. It was the way you might hover a hand over something hot. "You see how she's quilted this," Vera said. "Feel right here, count them, the little running stitches." Etta bent and felt the tiny ridges of thread. "There's 11 of those to the inch, maybe 12. You know what that is? A good quilter, a church circle, quilter like me, she does 8-9 to the inch and she's proud of it. 11, 12, that's no hobby. That's somebody who quilted every night of her life for 50 years and never showed a soul." Her voice had gone rough. "I quilted next to that woman 14 years and I never knew." Etta looked at the field of stitches. The evenness of them was almost impossible. The small even hills of thread marched across the cotton, in lines so straight they might have been drawn with a rule. "How do you know she did it at night?" Etta asked. Vera pointed to the lamp on the table. "Kerosene. The power's been out here 40 years. She had electric. But you quilt by a single low lamp pulled in close with the light coming from the side. That's how you see the loft of the cloth and catch a stitch that's gone crooked." She touched the corner of the quilt, and look here. You see where the thread color changes, just this one row? She unpicked that whole row and did it over. The line wandered maybe a 1/16 of an inch. She took out 100 stitches and did them again. Vera shook her head. She used to say it at the circle. The only thing she ever said that I remembered word for word. A crooked line means a careless heart. We all thought she was being hard on herself. Vera looked up. She wasn't talking about the quilt. Etta did not say anything. She was looking at the back corner of the quilt. Something small had been worked into the binding there, in thread only a shade off from the cloth. You would never see it unless you knew to look. It was a number, embroidered in tiny stitches, a Roman numeral. She turned the corner up to the light. The numeral was no bigger than a grain of rice. One single stroke, the first. "There's a number on it," Etta said, "in the corner, a 1. Vera leaned in and found her reading glasses in her coat. She looked a long time. "She numbered them," Vera said, "every one, so she'd know the order." She sat back on her heels. "Etta, how many are up here?" Etta stood and went to the shelves. For the first time she began to read the little paper tags on the muslin sleeves. They were dated, each one. The earliest the spring of 1974, the next, the spring of 1975, then 1976. The dates ran down the shelf and along the next and onto the third, one for nearly every year. A few years had 2. The last tag, in fresher ink, read only the previous autumn. "There's 40-some," Etta said. Her voice did not sound done like her own a year. "Sometimes 2. Going back to 1974. The same year her mother had quietly walked out of the church quilting circle and never gone back. The same year Etta realized, with a slow cold turning in her chest, that she herself had turned 16. She did not understand it yet, but she had begun to. Vera stayed for supper that night. Over the persimmon pudding she told Etta what she knew. It was not the whole of it, but it was enough to start. The Schenck women had always quilted. Vera had heard this from Wilma in the years before 1974, in the easy talk women have over a frame. Wilma's mother, Etta's grandmother, a sharp woman named Frida, had quilted, and Frida's mother before her, a woman who had come over from the old country as a girl. She had come from somewhere in the German Catholic country that emptied out its second sons and unmarried daughters into southern Indiana all through the 1840s. They had come to Edinburgh because the land was cheap and the church was the right one. The hills looked, the old people said, a little like home. There's a story in that family, Vera said, about a quilt that came over on the boat. The great-great-grandmother's. I never saw it. Wilma talked about it once. Said her own grandmother kept it wrapped in a sheet and wouldn't let the children touch it. She scraped the last of the pudding from the dish. I thought it was just a thing people say. Every family's got a treasure that turns out to be a horse blanket. She looked up at the kitchen ceiling as if she could see through it to the cedar shelves. Maybe not this family. Etta walked Vera home in the dark, down the gravel road between the bare fields. The frogs were just starting up in the wet ditches. The first warm smell of the year came up out of the thawing ground. At Vera's gate, the old woman stopped. Your mother wasn't a cold woman, Vera said. I know that's what you think. I watched you stand at the back of that funeral like you were waiting to be told to leave. She put her hand on Etta's arm. I knew her 50 years, and I'm telling you she was the warmest woman I ever met. She just kept it where nobody could get at it. She let go. I expect you'll figure out why. It's all up there in the stitches if you learn to read them. Etta drove home that night with the thimble in her pocket and the watch saying 4:10. She did not sleep. On Sunday she went back out to the farm before it was light. She wanted to read the stitches. She did not know how. So she did the only thing she knew how to do, which was to start at the beginning and pay attention. It was how she paid attention to a frightened patient at 3 in the morning, watching for the small signs of a thing that cannot be said out loud. She took down quilt number 1, the spring of 1974, and spread it on the clean-swept floor under the bulb. She got down on her hands and knees with her face close to the cloth, and she looked. It was a simple pattern. Squares of printed cotton set on point, the prints small and faded, little sprigs of flowers and dots and stripes. Etta did not know the names of the prints. She would learn later that they were feed sack cottons. That was the patterned cloth flour and seed companies once used for their sacks. A farm wife would buy chicken feed by the brand of the bag, because she meant to make her daughters dresses out of it. The prints in this quilt were older than that. Older than 1974 by far, 40-50 years older. Her mother had been working with cloth she had saved her whole life. In the center of the quilt, where a less careful maker would have put another square of print, there was a single block of plain unbleached muslin. On that muslin, in white thread on white cloth so faint you had to tilt it to the light to see it at all, Wilma had quilted a date. Not the date she made it, a date in the autumn of 1958. Etta knelt over it a long time. The autumn of 1958. She did the arithmetic she did not want to do. She had been born in the spring of 1958. Her mother had quilted. Into the first thing she made the year her daughter turned 16, the date of that daughter's first autumn in the world. Etta got up off the floor and went to the little window where the light came in. She stood there until she could see again. Then she went back down on her knees. She took out the small spiral notebook she carried for work, and she began to write down what she found. Quilt 1, 1974. Feed sack squares, very old cloth. Plain block in the center, date quilted in white, autumn 1958. Roman numeral 1 in the corner. She did not have a word yet for what she was looking at. But she had started keeping the record, the way her mother had kept the record. One careful entry at a time. The weeks went on, and the spring came up around the old house the way it does in that country, all at once after holding back so long. The redbud bloomed first, that hard, impossible pink along the wood's edge. Then the dogwood opened white in the stump story. The creek dropped and cleared. The peepers gave way to the deeper frogs. One warm evening, the first whippoor called from the back 40 and did not stop until dawn. Etta worked her nights and slept her days and drove out to the farm on her mornings off. She went up into the attic and she read. She got faster at it. By the second week, she could tell the feed sack prints from the dress cottons, and the dress cottons from the older calicos her mother must have inherited rather than bought. She learned to look for the center block because there was always a center block, and there was always a date quilted into it, in thread you could only see by tilting the cloth. The dates were never the year the quilt was made. They were always older. They were, Etta came to understand, the dates of things. Quilt 11, made in the spring of 1985, had a date quilted into the center from the summer of 1969. Etta sat with that one a long time before she placed it. The summer of 1969 was the summer she had broken her arm falling out of the Holtcamp's hayloft. Her mother had driven her 40 minutes to the hospital in Jasper without a word the whole way. And Etta had decided, at 11 years old, in the silence of that car, that her mother did not love her. She had carried that decision for 50 years. Now she knelt on an attic floor and looked at the date of it. It was quilted into white cloth in stitches so small, and even that her mother must have worked at them for weeks. In the dark, after everyone was asleep, the year Etta turned 27 and had stopped calling home. She thought of that drive to Jasper differently now. A woman who does not love a child does not memorize the date she broke her arm. She does not, 16 years later, sit up half the night sewing it in thread no one will ever see. Vera came back out on a Wednesday to read more of them. The old woman could date a cloth faster than Etta could find the center block. She taught as she went, the way she must have taught girls at the church frame 50 years before. Bubblegum pink, that color there, Vera said, holding a corner to the window. They didn't have that dye before about 1930, so this print's no older than that. But this brown next to it, that's a mourning print. That's old. That's your grandmother's grandmother's time. She rubbed the cloth between two fingers, and feel the batting through it. Lumpy. It's cotton, hand-carded. After 1960 or so, they went to that polyester, smooth as anything. You can date a quilt halfway just by what's inside it, where you can't even see. How did you learn all this? Etta asked. 60 years at a frame, Vera said. You learn a thing if you do it 60 years. Your mother knew 10 times what I know. She just never had anybody to tell it to. She set the cloth down gently. That's the part that'll grieve me till I'm in the ground, Etta. Not that she's gone, that she sat up alone all those nights with all that in her hands, and her own circle was 3 miles down the road, and she never said a word. Vera made Etta try it herself before she left that day. She set up the broken-down frame as best they could, and clamped a scrap of muslin in it, and put the worn thimble on Etta's middle finger. You don't push the needle through with your fingertip, Vera said. You'll bleed all over the cloth and you'll never get a small stitch. You rock it. You set the point with the thimble, and you rock your hand down and up, and you load 3-4 stitches on the needle before you pull through. The thimble does the work, your mother's thimble. She watched Etta's hand. There, you felt that little give? That's the rocker. That's the whole secret. Took me 2 years to find it. You found it in an afternoon. She sat back. It's in the hands, Etta. It comes down through the hands. Etta's first row was crooked. She looked at it a while. Then she took it out and did it again, and she did not decide to do that, exactly. Her hands decided, and she understood, picking out her own bad stitches under the bare bulb, a little more of her mother than 50 years of living in the same county had ever taught her. Vera watched her work and was quiet for a time. Then she said a thing she had not meant to say. I knew your grandmother a little, Frida. She said the name carefully, the way you handle a thing with a sharp edge. Hard woman. Hard, the offense post is hard. She and your mother had a falling out, the year you'd have been a girl. Nobody ever knew over what. Frida was the kind who'd cut a person off and never tell them why, just go silent and let them wonder for the rest of their lives which sin it was. Vera smoothed the muslin in the frame. I always wondered if that was where Wilma learned it. The silence. You learn how to love from the people who raised you, and if all they had to teach was silence, well. She did not finish the thought. It runs in families, Etta. More than the quilting does. The not saying runs deeper than anything. Etta thought about the year she turned 16. The year the quilts began. The year Frida and Wilma stopped speaking. She did not yet see how the two were tied. But she felt the knot of it somewhere under the floor of the story, waiting to be pulled. She was a long time noticing the last quilt. It was not on a shelf. It was folded over the rail of the broken frame, half finished, the binding done on 3 sides and raw on the 4th. A threaded needle was still pushed through the cloth at the edge of the unworked corner, the way you leave it when you mean to come back in the morning. The thread led to nowhere. She had not come back. Etta found the tag for it tucked in the muslin underneath. The most recent date. The previous autumn. The autumn her mother went into the home. In the corner where the numeral should have been, there was nothing. The number had not been put on yet. It was the only 40-some that her mother had not lived to finish, or to sign. Etta did not touch the needle. She left it exactly where her mother's hand had left it, pushed halfway through the cloth, waiting. She sat down at the frame once that week, with the thimble on her finger. She had the rocker now. She could have set 3 stitches along that raw 4th side and nobody would have known the difference but her. She held the needle over the line her mother had started, and she could not push it through. It was not the work. It was that the line was a sentence her mother had stopped in the middle of. Etta did not yet know how it was meant to end, and she would not put words in a dead woman's mouth. She took the thimble off and set it on the table by the cold lamp. Some things you finish only when you have earned the right to. In town that week, the talk had started. Etta felt it before she heard it. The woman at the grocery counter held her change a half-second too long. At the Ettinger Cafe, where Etta stopped for eggs on her way out to the farm, Bonnie, who ran the place, set the plate down and lingered. "Heard you found something out at your mom's," Bonnie said. She kept her voice light. "Whole town saying it. Wilma Schenck, of all people. Quiet as a church mouse, that woman. Came in here Fridays for the fish and never said 10 words. She refilled the coffee. Etta hadn't asked her to refill. Funny, isn't it? The ones who
Sure.
don't say anything. Turns out they were the ones with the most to say." Etta did not answer that, but she carried it out to the car with her, and out to the farm, and up the stairs. Most of the dates she could place now. A wedding she'd had at the courthouse with no family there. A surgery. The day she got her AIDS certificate, which she had told no one in her family, and which her mother should not have known about, and somehow had. But there was one she could not place. Quilt 19, a date in the winter of 1991. Etta sat with it under the window for the better part of an hour, going back through that winter in her mind, and she came up with nothing. Nothing had happened to her that winter that she could find. She wrote it down with a question mark. She never did learn what it was. There are things a mother keeps that a daughter is not meant to recover, and Etta made her peace with that one slowly, over years, and never fully. If you have ever stood at the back of a room, certain that the people who should have loved you simply didn't, then stay with me here. Because what the woman from the State Museum said, when she finally knelt down on that attic floor, is the part of this story I have been waiting to tell you. It changes everything that comes after. But before the museum came the third cedar chest. It was a Sunday in late April. Etta had read her way through nearly all the muslin sleeves and most of the chests. She had left the third chest for last, because it was heavy and the lid stuck. When she finally worked it open, the cedar smell came up so strong it made her eyes water. Inside, on top, wrapped not in muslin, but in an old bedsheet gone soft and yellow with age, was something her mother had never made. It was older than anything else in the attic. Etta knew it the moment she touched it. The cloth had the weight of real age. The colors had gone down to the soft browns and faded reds and indigos of dye that was a century and a half old. She lifted it out and carried it to the window and opened it. Even she, who knew nothing, could see what this was. It was not a thing a farm wife had run up out of feed sacks of an evening. It was an applique quilt, the kind where each block is a separate picture sewn down onto white ground. Baskets of flowers, a spray of roses, a wreath, a bird with its wings spread. The work was so fine, the stitches all but vanished into the cloth. In the corner of each block, someone had inked a tiny initial and a date. The dates were all the same year, the autumn of 1851. Worked into the very center block, in faded brown thread on cloth gone the color of weak tea, was a name. Etta did not know it. It was in a language she could not read, and beneath it, in stitches a different hand had added much later, was a single English word: home. Behind her, on the table by the window, the kerosene lamp sat cold where her mother had left it. The thimble was in Etta's pocket. The watch said 4:10, and in her hands she held 170 years of women she had never met. Every one of them had sat up alone in the dark and put into thread the things she could not bring herself to say. She only knew, kneeling there in the April light, that she had been wrong about the most important thing in her life. Her mother had spent 50 years trying to tell her so, and she had not found a way to do it that did not require Etta to come up the stairs alone and learn, stitch by stitch, how to read it. The woman from the museum was named June Ferris, and she did not look like Etta had expected. Etta had pictured someone in a suit. June showed up in a canvas jacket and cotton gloves, with a flat case of tools and the patient, unhurried manner of a person who handles old things for a living. It was a little after 2 when she came up the attic stairs. She did not say much at first, she just looked. Etta had called the museum on Vera's advice, half expecting to be told politely that old quilts were a dime a dozen. Instead, a curator had called back within the hour. She had asked, in a careful voice, whether Etta could describe the applique quilt one more time. June spread the 1851 quilt on a clean sheet and bent over it with a small light and a magnifier. She was silent so long that Etta finally asked if something was wrong. "No," June said, not looking up. "Nothing's wrong." She moved the light along a seam. See how the white ground is woven, that close, even weave. That's hand-loomed. Nobody was machine weaving cotton this fine in this country in 1851. This came from somewhere else. She touched the edge of a brown rose. And this dye. This is madder, a plant dye. The chemistry of it dates the decade almost as well as a signature. She sat back. Whoever made this knew exactly what she was doing. The same way your mother knew. This is the grandmother of everything downstairs. She looked at Etta for the first time. Do you have any idea what you have here? No, Etta said honestly. June was quiet a moment, choosing her words the way a careful person does. I need to do this properly, she said. Documentation, comparison, the whole process. I won't put a numbers to it in this attic, because a number in an attic isn't worth anything. She began gently to fold the quilt back into its sheet. But I'll tell you this much, I've been doing this 22 years. I have knelt on a great many attic floors, and my hands are shaking, Mrs. Schenck, which they have not done in a long time. She stood and looked down the long room at the cedar shelves and their 40 muslin sleeves. And that's only the one quilt, June said. Most people, I'd be telling them the old applique is the treasure and the rest is sentiment. But I've looked at 3 of your mothers, the stitch count, the hand, the way she dated them. She shook her head slowly. I don't think you have one treasure up here, Mrs. Schenck. I think you have a body of work. I think your mother was an artist nobody ever saw, and that is a rarer thing than any single quilt. We need to talk about whether the museum might show them. Etta stood very still. Show them. People in a room looking. The thing her mother had spent 50 years making sure no one could do. June came back twice more that spring to do it properly. She brought a young assistant and a camera on a stand and acid-free tissue by the roll, and she worked the way Etta worked, a patient, slow and respectful, narrating quietly so Etta would understand. She measured each quilt and photographed the front and the back. She wrote down the stitch count and the batting and the bindings in a ledger. She turned out the other corners and recorded the little Roman numerals 1 through 41. When she found that the last one had no number at all, she went quiet for a moment and wrote that down too. There's a project in this state, June said on the last visit. We document quilts and the women who made them, because for 200 years nobody bothered to write the names down. A man builds a barn, and it's got his name on the county plat. A woman makes 400 square feet of this. She laid her gloved hand flat above a quilt without touching it, and it goes in a chest, and she dies, and her grandchildren use it to wrap the good dishes when they move. We lose them by the thousand. She looked at Etta. We are not going to lose your mother. She is going to have a name on a wall. Do you understand me? After 50 years in that attic, your mother is going to be looked at by strangers on purpose. Etta had to turn and look out the little window for a while before she could answer. Out past the glass, the redbud had gone from pink to green, and the creek had dropped to a summer trickle, and somewhere a long way off a tractor was working a field. When she turned back, her face was dry, but it had cost her something. She'd have hated it, Etta said. Maybe, June said, and began folding tissue, or maybe hiding it, was the only way she could stand to make it. Those aren't always different things with people like her, the hiding and the wanting to be found. She closed her ledger. I've met a few. They're the ones worth the drive. That evening, after June had gone, the phone rang at Etta's apartment in town. It was Gary. Word had gotten around Eddinger the way word does. Vera had told no one. But June's truck had been seen in the drive twice, with state plates. A museum truck in a farm drive in a town that is a thing people talk about over the meat counter. What's this I hear about somebody from Indianapolis out at the house? Gary said. There was no hello. Mom left a lot of quilts, Etta said. Up in the attic. Some of them are old. I had someone look at them. There was a silence on the line. In it, Etta could hear her brother doing arithmetic of his own. It was the same arithmetic he had done his whole life, the kind that ended in a number. The attic's yours, I know that, Gary said. And his voice had changed. Gone smooth and reasonable. I'm not saying it isn't. I just think before anybody hauls anything off to a museum, the family ought to sit down together. That's all. That stuff is Mom's. It's all of ours, really, when you think about it. Etta stood at her kitchen window. The watch ticked on the sill, saying 4:10. She looked out at the gray dusk coming down over the parking lot, and she understood that the easy part was over. You said it was junk, Gary, she said quietly. You said better me than you. That was before I knew, Gary said. Then he heard it, what he had said. He did not take it back, and the line between them went very quiet. She did not sleep that night, either. Toward morning, she gave up and drove back out to the farm in the dark and let herself in, and went up the stairs with a flashlight before the bulb could even warm. She had one thing left to look for. June had asked her, on the way out, whether Wilma had ever left anything written down, a letter, a record, anything in words rather than thread. Etta had said she didn't think so. Her mother was not a woman of words. That was the whole trouble. But she had not looked in the steamer trunk, the brass-cornered one. She had passed out over twice, because the lid opened on nothing but folded linens, and linens were not what she was hunting. She knelt by it now and lifted the linens out. She felt along the bottom of the trunk the way you learn to feel along the rails of a hospital bed, for a thing a patient has hidden. The wood gave slightly under her hand at one end. Her father had built a false bottom into it. Of course he had. He had built the cedar shelves and oiled the hinges and kept the whole thing ready. He had been in on it the entire time. The board lifted out. Beneath it, lying flat, was a single envelope, yellowed at the edges, the flaps sealed. On the front, in her mother's careful hand, the same hand that had numbered 40 quilts in the corners where no one would look, were 2 words. For Loretta. Not Etta, Loretta, her whole name. The name her mother had given her and almost never used out loud. Etta knelt on the attic floor in the gray first light, with the envelope in both hands, and she did not open it, not yet. She had read 40 years of her mother's silence, stitch by stitch, to get this far. She was not going to read the last of it kneeling in the cold. She put the thimble in her pocket. She carried the envelope down to the kitchen, where the light was better, and set the percolator on. Then she sat down at her mother's table to wait for the coffee and the courage at the same time. The coffee came first, the courage took longer. Etta drank half the cup with the salt in it, the way her mother had drunk it. The light came up gray and then yellow across the linoleum. Her father's slivered were pale. The envelope sat on the table between her 2 hands. She had handled a great many last things in her work. She knew the unopened ones weighed the most. So she finished the coffee. She turned the envelope over. She worked her thumb under the flap her mother had sealed with her own tongue 40 years before, and she took out the pages. There were 3 of them in her mother's careful hand. It was the same hand that had numbered the quilts. The ink had gone a little brown. The date at the top was the spring of 1974. She had written it the same year she started, the quilts. She had written it, sealed it, and hidden it under the false bottom her husband built. Then she had said nothing for 50 years and let her daughter believe the worst. The saying of it out loud was the one thing she could not do. Etta understood that now. She read the letter twice. Then she read it a 3rd time, slowly, the way you read a thing you mean to keep. Loretta, if you are reading this, then I am gone, and you have come up the stairs, and you have done the hard part. That is the part I could never do. So I will try to do my part now, on paper, where I am braver than I am in a room. I want to tell you that I loved you. I am writing it plain because I never once said it plain, and you deserve to see the word sit on a line. I loved you from the autumn you were born. Your father stopped his watch the hour you came, 4:10 in the afternoon, and he never started it again. That was his way of saying a thing he could not say either. We were a quiet pair. I did not know it would cost you so much. You were 16 the year I started. You said something to me at the kitchen table. You said I had never once told you I was proud. You were right. I opened my mouth to fix it and nothing came out. Nothing ever came out. My own mother never told me, and her mother never told her. I think the words got lost somewhere back there and never came down to us. My mother. But you do not need to carry that too. It is enough that you know I tried. So I did the only thing my hands knew how to do. Every year I made you one. I put the date of something good of yours in the center, where you would find it if you ever learned to look. I unpicked every crooked line. A careless line felt like a careless love, and I had given you enough of those. 41 of them now, one for every year I could not find the words. I am slowing down. My eyes are not what they were. I may not finish the last. The old quilt in the cedar chest came over with your great-great-grandmother. The name in the center is hers, in the old language. Your grandmother added the English word under it when she was young and never told me why. 4 of us, Loretta. 4 women who could not say it and sewed it instead. There is one I did not finish. You will know it. The needle is still in it. I am asking you to finish what I could not, the line and the rest of it. It is the only way I know to tell you the last thing. The love does not stop with the one who could not say it. It goes to the one who learns to. I am proud of you there. It is on a line. It is yours. Etta sat with the pages a long time. The line about the kitchen table had brought it all back, sharp as the day. She had been 16. It was a winter evening. She had brought home a report card, with marks her teachers had called the best in the class. She had set it on the table by her mother's elbow and waited. Wilma had looked at it and nodded and gone back to peeling potatoes. That was all. And Etta, 16 and full of the terrible courage of 16, had said the thing out loud. "You have never once told me you were proud of me, not once." She remembered her mother's hands going still on the potato. She remembered the long silence, the longest of her childhood. She had stood there in it, waiting. Her mother had not turned around. At last Etta had walked out and gone up to her room, and she had decided, with the whole of her young heart, that the silence was an answer. She had built 40 years on top of that evening. Now she knew what the silence had been. It had not been an answer. It had been a woman with her hands gone still on a potato, opening her mouth and finding the same nothing she always found. And then that same winter in the dark, after Etta was asleep, that woman had begun to make the first quilt. Etta did not weep, or not much. The grief she felt was not the sharp kind. It was the slower kind. It was the kind that comes when a wound you have carried for 50 years turns out to have been a misunderstanding the whole time. There is no good word for that feeling. It is relief and loss and a low anger that it took so long, all of them at once. Etta sat in it at her mother's table for a long while. Outside the window, a cardinal worked the bare lilac. The percolator ticked as it cooled. The morning went on the way mornings do, whether or not a life has just turned over. 4:10. She took the watch out of her coat and looked at it. Her father had stopped it at the hour she was born. 11 years she had carried that watch and called it broken. She had thought her father careless. She had thought everyone careless. She set the watch on the table, ticking, with the hands where he had left them. She would not move them now. Now she knew what they meant. In the days after the letter, Etta went back up into the attic and read the quilts again. All of them. Slowly, in order, the way you reread letters from someone after a funeral. She understood them now, and the understanding changed everyone. Quilt 7 was the year she got her AIDS certificate, the thing she had told no one in her family, the thing her mother should not have known about and somehow had. Quilt 22 was the autumn she left the husband who drank, the worst year of her life, the year she had been certain no one in the world was thinking of her at all. There was a date for the day she moved into the apartment over the hardware store alone. There was a date she could not place at first and then could. It was the afternoon years ago when she had sat in her car in the nursing home lot and cried. A patient she loved had died on her shift. She had told absolutely no one. She had thought herself completely alone in it. Her mother had not been at any of those moments, had not called, had not come, had said nothing, and had gone home and sat up in the dark and sewn the date of each one into cloth, so that 50 years later her daughter would kneel on a cold floor and understand at last. She had been watched over the whole time, by a love that could not make a sound. June came down again the next week, in person, because she said some things should not be done on a phone. She brought the appraisal in a folder, but she did not open it right away. She sat at Etta's kitchen table and they drank the salted coffee, and June told her how it would work, the loan agreement, the insurance, the climate-controlled cases. Then she put the number on the table the way a doctor puts a diagnosis on the table, plain and without dressing. The old applique quilt, the 1851 one, was the find of her career. A piece like it, documented with its line of makers known, would be valued at $74,000 on its own. Then there was the rest, the 41 quilts, the body of work of a single documented maker, with her dates and her hand and her record intact. That was a thing that almost never survived, June said, because the work of women like Wilma almost never survived. As a collection, with the documentation for insurance, she had put the whole of it at a little over $300,000. Etta was quiet. "Mrs. Schenck," June said, "are you all right?" "I'm fine," Etta said. She was looking at her father's watch on the windowsill. "It's a strange thing, to put a number on it." "It is, and I'll tell you something since you've gone quiet." June closed the folder. "That number is the least true thing I've said to you all day. I have to give you one because the law wants one and the insurance wants one. But it is not what you have. What you have is a woman who loved you for 50 years in the only language she had, and somebody finally able to read it back. There's no number for that. Don't let anybody talk you into trading it for the other kind." Before she left, June walked the cedar shelves with Etta one more time, in order, And she taught as she went, the way Vera did. She showed Etta how to read the years and the work itself. Look at the early ones, 30-some years ago. 11, 12 stitches to the inch, dead even, the whole field. June moved her gloved hand down the row without touching. Now look here, the last 5 or 6. The stitches get bigger, 9 to the inch. Then 7. See the line wander, just a little here and here. She didn't unpick those. She couldn't see well enough anymore to know they'd wandered. June was quiet a moment. She kept on past the point where she could do it the way she wanted to. That's the part that gets me. A perfectionist for 50 years, losing her eyes, and she didn't stop. She just made them a little less perfect and kept telling you. Etta looked at the late quilts a long time after that. The big honest stitches of a woman going blind in the dark and refusing to put the needle down. They were, she thought, the most loving thing in the whole attic. Her mother had cared more about the saying than the perfect. At the very end she had let the line wander, and said it anyway. Etta understood, later, that June had not been talking only about the museum. There was a thing she wanted to know before she let any of it go, though, and it was not about the money. It was about the name. The one in the center of the old quilt, in the old language, that nobody living could read. So one afternoon she brought the photographs June had made out to Vera's kitchen, and the two of them sat with them under the good lamp. Vera could not read it either, but Vera remembered things. She remembered Wilma saying once that the family had come from a valley in the south of the old country, a Catholic place. The women there had a way of marking a quilt, Wilma had said, with the name of the one it was made for, not the one who made it. So it isn't the great-great-grandmother's name, Etta said slowly. It's who she made it for. I'd reckon, Vera said. She held the photograph to the light. And then your grandmother, Frida, years later took up a needle and put one English word under it. Home, she set the photo down. I never knew Frida to do a soft thing in her life, but she did that. A hard woman alone some night, looking at her own grandmother's quilt, and the only thing she could think to add was that one word. Vera shook her head slowly. Maybe she meant it was home. Maybe she meant she wished it was. We won't know. That's the trouble with people who don't talk. They leave you one word and 100 years to wonder. June had done some of the wondering for her. She had taken the photographs to a man at the Historical Society who knew the German parish records. He traced the family back. The great-great-grandmother had come over in 1849, a girl of 17, on a ship out of Bremen. She was one of the thousands of second daughters the southern valleys of the old country sent to southern Indiana in those years. The land at home had run out. The land here was $1.25 an acre, and the church was the right one. She had carried almost nothing, a trunk, a rosary, and folded at the bottom a quilt begun by hands she would never see again, finished on the crossing by lamplight, with the name of someone left behind worked into the center. A girl of 17, alone on the water, sewing into cloth the name of a person she would never see again, so she would have it with her, so it would not be lost. The whole family came down from that, the whole quiet, stubborn, loving line of it. Etta looked at the photograph a long time. 4 women. The one who carried the quilt across an ocean for someone she loved. Frida, hard as a fence post, adding one soft word and no explanation. Wilma in the dark 41 years running, and now Etta, reading it all backward, the last of the line and the first to be told. She did not need a number for that either. Word had spread, of course, not the true number. A bigger one, the way numbers grow in a small town between the meat counter and the gas pump. By the time Gary called again, the figure going around Ettinger was 500,000, and Gary had stopped being smooth. He wanted the family to meet at the lawyer's office in Jasper, the same office. He used the word fair 4 times in one phone call, which was how Etta knew he had stopped believing it. She agreed to come. She did not have to. The attic was hers, sealed and signed, bought for $10 in front of a notary. But she went. She had spent her whole life avoiding the rooms where her family did its arithmetic, and she was done avoiding them. She drove down to Jasper the back way, the way her mother used to drive. Past the fields gone to stubble, past the white-frame church and the place where the road dipped through the creek bottom, where the fog sat low even at mid-morning. She had made this drive 1,000 times as a girl, in the silence of her mother's car, deciding she was not loved. She made it now, knowing different. The country looked the same. She did not. That was the strange thing about the truth coming late. It does not change a single fence post. It only changes the person driving past them. It was a little after 9 when she got there. Gary had brought his wife, Diane, and a folder. He had brought printouts about quilt auctions. He laid it all out on the lawyer's table, reasonable as a man can be when he has already decided. He talked about Mom's wishes. He talked about the family. He talked about how a museum was no place for things that ought to stay with blood. Etta let him finish. She had learned, in 30 years of night shifts, that you let a frightened person say the whole thing before you answer. "You called it junk, Gary," she said when he was done. "In this room, you told me better me than you. I paid the $10 you signed. I didn't know what was up there." "No," Etta said. "You didn't look. That was always the difference between us. I'm the one who looks." She had brought one thing with her. She had not planned to use it. It had only seemed wrong to leave it in the dark with the others, given what it was. She took it out of her bag now and unrolled it on the table, on top of his printouts. It was a small quilt no bigger than a baby would need, soft yellow and white. The stitches were close and perfect. In the corner was a Roman numeral. In the center, quilted white on white, was a date. The winter of 1979. Gary stopped talking. He knew the date. Etta had not known it for certain, not until she saw his face. The winter of 1979 was the winter Gary and Diane had lost a daughter, 3 days old, in a hospital in Indianapolis. They had not spoken of it in the family. They had never spoken of it at all. They had folded it away the way that family folded everything away. And their mother, who said nothing, who was 3 hours off and not told until it was over, had sat up that winter in the dark. She had made a quilt for a grandchild she would never hold. She had numbered it and folded it into muslin and put it on the shelf with the others. And she had said nothing about it for 46 years. Gary put his hand flat on the little quilt. He did not say anything. Diane had gone very still beside him, her eyes on the date in the center, and then she put her hand over her mouth and turned her face to the window. The lawyer looked down at the table. The printouts about auctions slid off the edge of it, and nobody picked them up. "Take it," Etta said quietly. "That one's yours, it always was." Gary folded the baby quilt. He did it clumsily, the way a man folds a thing he has never folded, all corners and no sense of it. He held it against his chest with one arm. He did not hold it the way you hold a thing worth money. He held it the way you hold a thing. He stood up. He did not say he was sorry. Etta did not need him to. The not saying was the family disease, and she could read it in him now, the way she had learned to read it in her mother. He took the baby quilt, and he left the rest. He left the folder on the floor. He walked out of the room, and Diane went after him, and the door closed. That was the whole of the fight. It was not much of one. The crack in a hard man does not always come with words. Sometimes it comes with the careful, clumsy folding of a small yellow quilt. Sometimes it is a man walking out of a room carrying the one thing in it that could not be sold. He left the rest. For once he had seen it for what it was. Etta sat alone in the lawyer's office after they had gone. It was the same office where she had counted out a 5 and 4 ones and 4 quarters in the cold, months before. She sat a while with her hands in her lap. Then she got down and gathered the printouts off the floor because someone had to, and she drove home in the early dark. The exhibition opened the following October at the State Museum in Indianapolis, in a long high room with good light. But Etta finished the last quilt first. She did it in August, alone at the broken-down frame in the attic. She could have taken it to a clean room with good light. She did it in the attic instead, by the kerosene lamp, because that was where it had been started, and that was where it was owed. She set the lamp the way Vera had taught her, low and close. The light came in from the side, so the loft of the cloth threw little shadows. She could see a crooked stitch now before she even made it. She put her mother's thimble on her own middle finger. The silver was pressed nearly through at the crown, worn thin by 50 years of nights, and it sat on Etta's finger as if it had been waiting for a hand the right size. She picked up where the needle still hung in the cloth. She did not pull it out. She drove it on through, the next stitch in the line her mother had stopped in the middle of. She rocked the needle the way she had been taught, setting the point against the thimble and rolling her wrist, loading 3 and 4 stitches to a pull. Her first few were not as small as her mother's. She took them out and did them again. A crooked line means a careless heart. She heard it in her mother's voice now, and she understood at last that it had never been about the quilt. She worked along the raw 4th side until the binding closed all the way around. When she came to the end, she popped the knot down into the batting, where it would never show, the way her mother had done 10,000 times in the dark. Somewhere in the second hour, her shoulders began to ache, the way her mother's must have ached 10,000 nights running. The lamp threw her own shadow large against the rafters. The whippoorwill that had called all spring was gone south now, and the attic was very quiet, and the only sound was the small dry pull of the thread through 3 layers of cloth. She thought about all the hours her mother had spent exactly here, in this chair, at this frame, in this silence, with this thimble on this finger. For the first time in her life, Etta did not feel that her mother had been far away from her. She felt that her mother had been about as close as a person can get, the whole time, just on the other side of a door painted shut. Then she sat back and looked at it. A whole one, finished. The first thing in 50 years the two of them had made together. There was the matter of the corner, the empty corner where the number should have gone and never had. Etta threaded a finer needle. In thread 1 shade off from the cloth, so small you would have to know to look for it, she worked the numeral her mother had not lived to set. Xli. 41. She did not add her own name under it. She thought about it and decided against it. The quilt was her mother's last sentence. Etta had only finished the line, and a person does not sign her name to another person's sentence. But under the 41, smaller still, in the same near-invisible thread, she worked one more mark, a single letter. L, not a signature. Just a hand reaching back along the line, answering at last. I am here. I read it. I am proud of you too. June built the exhibition the way Wilma had built the quilts, slowly and with no wasted motion. The 41 hung in order down the length of the room, 1 through 41, the dates of Etta's life running along the wall in the white-on-white thread you had to lean in to see. At the far end, alone on its own wall, hung the 1851 applique, the 4-generation quilt, with the old name in the center and the one English word beneath it. Home. There was a plaque. June had asked Etta what it should say, and Etta had thought about it a long time. In the end it was short. It gave the name of the great-grandmother in the old language, as near as anyone could spell it. It gave Frida's name. It gave Wilma's, and under those 3 it said, simply, and Loretta, who learned to read them. June had not told Etta she was adding that last line. Etta found it when she walked in on the morning of the opening. She stood in front of it a while. That was the only time all day she had to step out into the hallway to be alone. She had come early, before the doors opened, in the one good dress she owned. The navy one she wore to funerals, and now to this. The long room had been empty then, and quiet, full of the gray morning light coming down from the high windows. She had walked it alone once, end to end, past 41 years of her own life hung up in order on the wall. Nobody was there to see her do it. That felt right. It was how her mother would have walked it, if she had ever once let herself. Then June opened the doors and the quiet ended, and the room began to fill. The town came. That was the thing Etta had not expected. Eddinger was 3 hours off and not a town that drove to Indianapolis for art. But they came anyway. They came on a chartered church bus and in their own trucks. They were the people who had bought their feed at the same store as Wilma and sat 2 pews back from her at St. Boniface for 60 years and never once known what her hands did in the dark. Bonnie from the cafe came in her good dress. The woman from the grocery came. Men who had called the attic junk, if they were honest, came and stood in front of 400 square feet of their neighbors' hands and could not find anything to say. One of them was Earl Wessel, who farmed the section next to the Schencks and had helped carry Wilma's coffin in the spring. He stood in front of the quilts a long time, with his cap in his 2 hands. Etta knew him a little. He was not a man who said much. When he finally spoke, it was almost to himself. She brought us a hot dish every time somebody on our road took sick, he said. 40 years, left it on the step and was gone before you got to the door. We never could catch her to thank her. He looked down the long, bright row. Guess this is what she was doing the rest of the time. He put his cap back on. Quietest neighbor I ever had. Turns out I never knew her at all. At noon, June said a few words at the head of the room the way museums do. She did not say much. She gave the dates and the place and the name of the maker plainly, the way you read a name that has waited a long time to be read. Wilma Schenck of Eddinger, Indiana. Born 1934, died this past spring. A quilter, June said, of the first rank, entirely self-taught, entirely unknown in her lifetime by her own careful design. There was a little silence after the name. Etta had never in her life heard her mother's name said out loud to a room full of people. It was a small thing. It went through her like a current. A woman Etta had never met touched the glass and wept. Etta stood off to the side near the door, the way she had always stood out of 50 years of habit, but it was different now, standing there. She was not waiting to be told to leave. She was watching strangers weep over her mother's stitches, and she understood that this was the thing. This was the whole of it. Wilma had made sure no one could ever see, and now a room full of people were doing nothing but seeing, and they were undone by it. Her mother had finally got her room full of people. It had taken her dying, but she had got it. Vera came, of course. Etta pushed her chair through the room slowly. The two of them stopped at each quilt, and Vera read them out loud under her breath. She read the stitch counts and the cloth and the years, the way she had taught Etta to read them on the attic floor in the spring. At the 1851 quilt, she stopped a long time. 60 years I sat next to her, Vera said, and here she is, the whole of her finally where a body can see it. She reached up and held Etta's hand on the arm of the chair. You did this, not the museum lady, you. You went up the stairs, her old voice caught. She'd never say so I'll say it for her. You did good, Etta. Something happened after the exhibition that no one had planned. Women started bringing their quilts. Not to sell. To be looked at. A farm wife from 2 counties over drove in with her grandmother's wedding quilt in a pillowcase. She asked, shy as a girl, whether somebody might write down who made it, before everyone who remembered was gone. Then another came, then a church group. June started a file, and then the file became a project, and the museum put out a call across the southern counties. Bring us the quilts in your attics. Bring us the names. We will write them down before they are lost. One woman came with a quilt that was not finished. Her own mother had died with a needle still in it, the way Wilma had. She did not know what to do with it. She had heard somehow that the Schenck woman would understand. Etta sat with her at the St. Boniface frame one Tuesday and looked at the half-bound edge and the thread that led to nowhere. She did not tell the woman to finish it. She told her what Vera had told her, that you finish a thing like that only when you have earned the right to. That the day comes and you will know it. Then she put a thimble on the woman's finger and showed her the rocker, the way it had been shown to her. At St. Boniface, the parish hauled the old frame back out of the basement that winter. The circle started up again on Tuesday afternoons after a lull of 50 years, the same 50 years Wilma had spent quilting alone 3 miles away. Vera went on her good days and sat at the frame and showed the younger women how to rock a needle. Etta went too, when her shifts allowed. She was not the best hand there, but she was getting better. It was in the hands, Vera had said. It came down through the hands. Gary did not come to the exhibition. Etta had sent him a card with the date and a photograph of the baby quilt's wall. Before she remembered, he had taken that one home, and it was not on any wall. He did not answer the card. He did not come. She did not call again. They were not going to be repaired, the two of them. Some things do not get folded up neat at the end. She made her peace with the open edge of it, the way she had made her peace with the one date she could never place. Quilt 19, the winter of 1991. The year nothing she could find had ever happened to her. There are things a mother keeps that a daughter is not meant to recover. Etta let that one stay a mystery. Not every stitch is for us to read. She went back to her shifts in November, the same as before. The county home, the long fluorescent hours, the bodies turned and settled in the dark. But a thing had shifted in her that she did not have words for, which was fitting, because she came from a line of women who had never had words for the important things. There was an old man on her hall who had no one. His children had stopped coming years before. Most nights he was frightened, the way they get when the dark and the disease close in together. Most nights, Etta sat with him a few minutes she was not paid for. She tucked the blanket up under his chin so no cold could find a gap, and he settled. She had done this for 30 years, for 100 people whose families never knew her name. She had thought it made her invisible. She understood now that it had made her something else. She was her mother's daughter. That was the whole of it. She had been loving people in the dark, without thanks and without a sound, for as long as her mother had been quilting in the attic 3 miles down the road. Neither of them had ever found the words. Both of them had found a way. The line did not run out with Wilma. It had never been only about the cloth. She kept the thimble. Of all of it, the quilts and the old applique and the number June had put on paper, the thimble was the thing Etta took home. It sat on her kitchen windowsill in the apartment over the hardware store, next to her father's watch that still said 4:10. Some mornings the early light came through the dimple in the crown where the silver had worn away to almost nothing. It made a small, bright point of light on the sill. Etta would drink her coffee with the salt in it, the way her mother had. And she would look at the light coming through that worn place. the place her mother had worn thin with a love she could not say. There was one quilt she had kept back from the museum. Number 1. The spring of 1974, with the date of her own first autumn quilted white in the center. She had told June it was too worn to show, which was not quite true. The truth was simpler. After 50 years of not being allowed up those stairs, Etta wanted to sleep under the first thing her mother ever made for her. So she did. It lay on her narrow bed over the hardware store, the feed sack squares gone soft with the washing she had not dared give it at first. On the cold nights she pulled it up under her chin, the way she had learned to do for other people in the dark, all those years, for no thanks and no name. She went out to the farm one last time before Gary sold it in the late autumn. The hardwoods had gone to rust and gold along the creek. The first frost had laid the fields down flat. The attic was empty now, the cedar shelves bare, the broken frame given to the museum. She climbed the narrow stairs anyway. She stood in the long bare room a while, in the cold, clean smell of the cedar her father had lined it with. She pulled kitchash on the bare bulb. Then she pulled it again and let the dark come back. The dark was where it had all been made. The dark had never been empty. She had only thought it was. She had spent 50 years waiting to be told. The telling had been over her head the whole time, folded and warm and patient, asking nothing, waiting only for her to come up the stairs and learn the language. Love does not always speak. Sometimes it stitches in the dark for a lifetime and folds itself away and waits to be unfolded by the one it was always for. I keep coming back to that thimble, worn almost through at the top, from 50 years of nights nobody ever saw. You hold a thing like that and you start to wonder how many people you've known like it, folks who loved hard and quiet and never once found a way to say so out loud. If you had someone like that in your own life, a mother, a grandmother, somebody who showed it in 100 small ways you only understood much later, I'd be glad if you told me about them, down below. The ones who never said it out loud deserve to be said out loud somewhere. Because Wilma Schenck spent half a lifetime certain that a love she couldn't speak was worth less than a love that could. She was wrong about that. It wasn't worth less. It was just waiting, folded in the dark, for someone willing to climb the stairs.